Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridolu. I laid the headlines. Russia's UN Security Council president says Moscow is not threatening nuclear war. Russian President Vladimir Putin honors military blogger killed in cafe bombing. Plus, Chinese spy balloon was able to transmit information back to Beijing from the United States. Russia's ambassador to the United Nations held his first news briefing as president of the United Nations Security Council amidst international criticism against Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is accused of war crimes. Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia, who assumes the position over the weekend, told reporters that as long as the current world order in the United Nations stands, there will be no change in the rules of procedure. He also rebutted accusations that Russia is threatening nuclear war and called the claims propaganda and denied the use of nuclear weapons as part of the Russian military doctrine. And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg called for the immediate release of Ivan Gershkovich, a Moscow-based correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, who was arrested by Russia's FSB security service on suspicion of spying. Russia's FSB security service accused him of gathering information about the Russian defense company that was a state secret. The Wall Street Journal has denied that Mr. Gershkovich was spying. The White House has called the espionage charge, which carries a jail term of up to 20 years, ridiculous.
I joined the United States in their call on Russia to release the American journalist Ivan Gershkovich to ensure that his rights to work as a journalist are respected. His arrest is of great concern. It is important to respect freedom of the press, the rights of journalists, and the rights to ask questions and to do their job. So therefore we call on his immediate release.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urged the release of the Wall Street Journal reporter Ivan Gershkovich. According to Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he told Mr. Blinken it was unacceptable for Washington to politicize the case, adding that Mr. Gershkovich's fate would be determined by a court. He reiterated Russia's assertion, for which it has not yet presented any evidence, that the journalist was caught red-handed last week. Direct conversations between Mr. Blinken and Mr. Lavrov have been rare since Russia's February 24, 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The two spoke face-to-face for the first time since the invasion on the sidelines of a wider March 2 meeting in New Delhi. And UNESCO's Director General Audrey Azoulay met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Chernihiv, north of Kiev, to discuss the city's potential inclusion in the UN body's World Heritage List. Ms. Azoulay and Zelensky also discussed efforts to further protect Ukrainian cultural sites and promote education in the country, as well as the coordination of international support in those fields.
Thank you so much. Good message of supporting us, supporting Ukraine. You're very welcome.
It's first an honor for us to do so as UNESCO. I can imagine the human toll of war and all you're going through, but I appreciate that you give importance to the human dimension of it through the protection of culture and education, because we know that it defines Ukraine as a nation, and it is our mission in UNESCO to be on your side, to be on the side of the Ukrainian people, to protect this cultural heritage, to protect.
And as we did start by saying on the bulletin, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, who has now become the United Nations Security Council president, held his first media briefing. Ambassador Nebenzia, who assumed the position over the weekend, told reporters that as long as the current world order in the UN stands, there will be no change in the rules of procedure.
As long as the current world order with the UN and the Security Council stands, there will be no change in the rules of procedure.
The U.S. expects Russia to be spreading disinformation.
That we are spreading will be spreading, using the presidency to spread disinformation about Ukraine. That's a statement that is in vein of the Western narrative. One of the disinformation that the Western media and Western officials are spreading is the situation of Ukrainian children who were allegedly kidnapped from Ukraine and brought to Russia against their will. And this is just one aspect. But the Area Formula meeting, which I hope you will follow, is intended to dispel this narrative.
Nightmare sometimes about nuclear war.
I sleep well because I know that at least us, we are not asking for the nuclear war. We are not threatening nuclear war. All this narrative that Russia is threatening the world with the nukes is a part of a propaganda as well. We've been saying long time consistently that it is not in our military doctrine, which provides for very few specific cases when the nuclear weapons can be engaged.
Normal citizens feel offended that a country can chair the Security Council when its leader is under arrest warrant by the ICC.
I commented on the decision of the International Criminal Court. Besides being stupid, let's put things straight. That is also an illegitimate decision, means nothing to us. And I think that those that encourage that decision, perhaps they already regret they did it. Because, as I said, what they did, it doesn't make us closer to any resolution of the current crisis we are living in.
Vasily Nebenzia, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, at his first media briefing as UN Security Council president. And staying with Russia, its president, Vladimir Putin, has posthumously bestowed an award on a high-profile military blogger and supporter of Moscow's assault on Ukraine, who was killed in an explosion at a St. Petersburg cafe. Vladimir Tatarsky, whose real name was Maxim Fomin, had been given the Order of Courage, according to a Kremlin decree, for courage and bravery shown during a professional duty. Meanwhile, the woman arrested on suspicion of killing him in that St. Petersburg cafe explosion has admitted that she brought a figurine to the cafe that exploded. In a video published by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Daria Trepova said, "I carried a figurine in there which exploded." When asked why she was detained, she said, "Detained, I would say, for being at the scene of the murder of Vladimir Tatarsky." Ms. Trepova refused to say who gave her the figurine and instead answered, "May I tell you all about it later." Let's talk now to Dr. Tonya Burns, researcher and senior lecturer at the Anglia Ruskin University in the British capital, London. Good morning to you as always, Dr. Burns. Thank you for your time this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Ladi.
Let's begin with this issue of this blogger and all the other side issues that are connected with it. Perhaps on a global scale, the Russians have assumed the presidency of the UN Security Council. And in that role, there are so many people who are scared, so to speak, that they would use the position, as the ambassador there was saying, to spread misinformation and propaganda. And he says that, you know, nothing is going to change. This is something that is routine, is a matter of procedure. Next month, somebody else will be in charge of the UN Security Council. Is that a way to look at it?
Yeah. Thank you, Ladi. In fact, the ascendancy of Russia to the presidency of the UN Security Council has been described by so many diplomats and international relations experts as one of the biggest, sorry to use the word now, April Fool joke of the time. Many have hoped that due to the lingering crisis, from the, invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that Russia should not have been allowed to, assume this position, even though it's just for 1 month, but it has huge diplomatic, impact. So that argument is going on. Like you have said, it's just procedural. There's nothing that doesn't confer much powers on Russia, doesn't change anything. But it is a question of, people looking at it from the human angle, that a country that has, invaded another sovereign nation, assuming such an important organ of the United Nations. So that's the angle many people are looking at it from. But on the flip side, when you also look at it, it also puts a moral burden on Russia, because now they have assumed the presidency, and they will be chairing the Security Council matters for the next 1 month. So it puts a moral burden on them, and it will also prick their conscience to do the right thing as far as this Ukraine crisis is concerned. But something that the Russians are also saying is that when the Americans assumed the presidency of the UN Security Council, that was when they also invaded Iraq. So when you look at all these things in the global space, you see that history has a way of invading, repeating itself. But the context of the invasion of Iraq by the Americans and the context of the invasion of Ukraine by Russians are very, very different.
Of course, the other side of this is that one of the things that had happened is that it appears to show the, shall we say, the arcaneness of the United Nations and its procedures. Because as you pointed out, this is routine. Every member of the Security Council will at one point in time be president of the council, and it doesn't confer any particular advantages or not on that country. But then beyond that, do you see a situation where this might push the agenda for reforming the United Nations? Because as you said, many people thought that Russia shouldn't be allowed to assume. But as the United States and the others said, look, there's no way within the rules of stopping this from happening. That is what the United Nations rules stipulate. So do you think this would ginger forward the call for reforms of the United Nations and its rules-based system in this kind of situation?
Definitely. In fact, when you look at the statutes of the United Nations as the organization was formed in 1945, following the Second World War, a lot of their rules and guidelines are just, they are obsolete as we speak. So this is one major area. And there have been this serious argument in diplomatic space for, when it comes to these UN Security Council resolutions. People have said, why is it that just 5 nations in the world have that veto power? If you notice what happened in February last year when Russia attacked Ukraine, the Russians vetoed the UN Security Council. China abstained, India abstained, the United Arab Emirates, they also abstained. So people just look at it and said, there is no balance here. So I think the words, things like this bring, to the fore the need for urgent reform within the United Nations itself, especially when it comes to the Security Council. Because, to be honest, a lot of international relations experts see the UN as a toothless bulldog. They just bark, but they don't bite.
But then, as you pointed out, those 5 countries you mentioned that are permanent members and who, hold this veto power, gained that power when they formed the United Nations in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, which the 5 of them won. The United States, the UK, the then Soviet Union, China, you know, and France. I mean, that's the basis on which they put this veto power for themselves within the UN system. But then there has been no agreement since that 1945 about how to go about reforming this arrangement. Every time there's an attempt, there's a push. I remember that when Africa's own Kofi Annan was Secretary General, he tried to push for an African country to, you know, be given that, for Germany, for Japan, for a couple of other countries that had become, you know, really important in the world order. But for you to change the system, you require the consent of these 5 people who put the veto in the first place, and they'll never give up that veto. So what are we to do then? Because if it's Russia this time, next time it will be the United States or France. I mean, all of them have used the veto power at one point.
Yeah, all of them have used it. And you see, like I was saying in my last speech, the fact that, you know, people don't know nations don't know the impact of some of the decisions they take until it directly affects them. So, and that is why people have always said, when you look at organizations like the United Nations, these 5 permanent members have always used the UN Security Council to their advantage, like you rightly mentioned. So now, the United States in particular is particularly not happy that Russia have taken this presidency this month of April. They are really, really, you know, not happy with it at all. And the same with most of the countries in the NATO alliance. So, but probably this punch in the face will make them have a rethink so that everybody will sit down and really change some of the laws and statutes of the UN as an organization. It is not just only even the Security Council. If you look at even the World Health Organization, if you look at the UNESCO side, other, you know, statutory organs of the UN is so lopsided. And I hope that this particular Russia-Ukraine experience will cause the change that most international relations experts have been desiring for a long time.
I can't let you go, Dr. Burns, without asking you about something happening within the UK itself at the moment. And this is a fallout directly of the conflict in Ukraine, the economic impact this time of that, and that's talking about the cost of living crisis. At this time, it's the teachers, you know, who have taken, before now, you and I have discussed ambulance men, the border force, we've discussed nurses, we've discussed doctors, and so on. And today it is the teachers. What's the situation this morning? Is there anything you can tell us about the impact that this is having?
Yeah, thank you, Ladi. In fact, that's my sector, it's my constituency. I'm in education here in the UK. And the teachers they are flexing their muscles. Yesterday, the National Education Union had their conference, and about 191,000 teachers balloted, which represented a huge 66% turnout, and decided that they are going to go on strike because the offer, the pay package and condition of service that the government has, you know, put forward, it was just, you know, throwing a pebble into the ocean. So teachers are upset. So strikes have been slated for April the 27th and May the 2nd. You know, in the weeks coming for teachers to strike. And it's not just the teachers, like the passport office staff. As I speak to you, they have embarked on a 5 weeks industrial action. Junior doctors are still threatening. Airport workers are threatening, and civil servants are threatening. So the UK, in terms of industrial harmony, it is all zigzag at the moment. So, and the workers are not budging, and government is not ready, you know, to, you know, accede to their demands. And what makes the teachers strike in the UK so, you know, complex is the fact that teachers in Wales and Scotland have been given some very good bumper offers, but those in England are the ones reeling. So they are like why are we being discriminated against? Our colleagues in Wales and in Scotland, are they not in the same profession with us? So that is what the situation is at the moment. But we are still hoping that the Education Secretary, she will bring forth better offers so that these strikes don't go ahead.
Now, of course, when you say that, I remember that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, had pointed out that, look, we would love to offer more, but we simply cannot afford it. It's not possible for the government to afford it. The government is broke, and that, a lot of spending cuts are going to have to, be brought in order to stabilize the government's finances. How do you think that is playing out with all these people who are going on strike?
Yeah, it's not going well with those going on strike. The thing is, I think the government, the current government, is not very sincere in their dealings with the teachers. And as a researcher, we try to look at the figures and see how does this really work. Let me just, because people are watching and listening to this program now. The government has offered a £1,000 one-off payment, for this current school year, on top of an average of 5.4%, which will rise, which they gave already in September last year, and they are also adding a 4.5% rise next year. So when you break these figures down, Ladi, you find out that it doesn't match up with, even though the government is saying these figures are above the current inflation rate and all that, but it doesn't match up with the reality on the ground. So the teachers are asking for, very huge sums, and to be honest, they know that the government cannot really meet their need. But the government has not even gotten to half the midpoint of the table. That is where the argument is. So most of us, we think that the government should meet the teachers halfway, because we know that in negotiations, you can't get everything. You win some and you lose some. But the government is trying to embark on a PRO war and trying to get citizens to support them. But as I speak to you, a lot of the citizens are on the side of the teachers. So we know that the coming days ahead promises to be really exciting as far as negotiations are concerned.
Indeed, they do promise to be full of drama and controversy, as you point out. Dr. Burns, thank you as always for your time on the program this morning.
Thank you, Ladi. Have a great day.
You too. And after the break, Finland joins NATO today as Russia readies to strengthen its military. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. A warm welcome back. The Chinese spy balloon that transited the U.S. earlier this year was able to capture imagery and collect some signals intelligence from U.S. military sites. Reports say the balloon was also able to transmit information back to Beijing in real time, and that the United States government still does not know for sure whether the Chinese government could wipe the balloon's data as it received it. That raises questions about whether there is intelligence the balloon was able to gather that the United States still doesn't know about. A U.S. intelligence official had said the intelligence community has not been overly concerned about the information the balloon was able to gather because it is not much more sophisticated than what Chinese satellites are able to glean as they orbit over similar locations. And the office of the United States House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has confirmed that he will meet Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen in California this week in a move condemned by Beijing. Mr. McCarthy's office said that the Speaker will host a bipartisan meeting tomorrow with Ms. Tsai, who will be traveling through the United States on her way back to Taiwan, a self-ruled democracy that China claims that it owns. The California visit will be the second of two stops for Ms. Tsai in the United States as she makes her way to and from Central America. And the office of the Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has named 4 additional bases that the United States forces will have access to under an existing defense agreement to expand military cooperation. The Philippine government announced in February that it would allow rotating batches of U.S. forces to indefinitely stay in the new camps, in addition to 5 local bases earlier designated under a 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. The Presidential Communications Office said in a statement that the 4 sites will be in Isabela and Cagayan on the island of Luzon, facing towards Taiwan, and in Palawan near the disputed Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. And the Belarus Ministry of Defense says it started combat readiness inspections of its armed forces. In a statement published on a Telegram, the ministry said the inspections would determine the capacity of military units to perform at the highest level of combat readiness. A previous flurry of military drills in Belarus raised concerns in Ukraine that it might take an active role in the conflict in its neighbor. Minsk denied any such plans, but warned that any incursions into Belarusian territory would invite a response. And the Russian envoy to Minsk has said Russia will place tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus near its allies' borders with NATO countries in a move set to escalate tensions with the West. The Russian ambassador to Belarus, Boris Gryzlov, said that the weapons would be moved to the country's western border as part of moves to, quote, ensure security. Mr. Gryzlov said a storage facility will be completed by July the 1st, without specifying exactly where the weapons would be stationed. The envoy's comments come after Russian President Vladimir Putin last month announced plans to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Belarus shares borders with Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland, all of which are members of NATO, the military alliance originally established to deter Soviet expansion in Europe after World War II. And Finland is expected to officially become NATO's 31st member state today, marking the completion of a swift journey into the military alliance following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Nordic country has an 810-mile border with Russia, meaning NATO's frontier with Russia will roughly double in length. Finland had applied to join NATO alongside its neighbor Sweden as Russia's offensive in Ukraine intensified. The last hurdle to membership was removed last week when Turkey's parliament voted to ratify Helsinki's application, even as it kept Sweden's bid on hold. And Russia will strengthen its military capacity in response to Finland joining NATO. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko said, quote, "We will strengthen our military potential in the western and northwestern directions in the event that the forces and resources of other members of NATO are deployed in Finland. We will take additional steps to reliably ensure Russia's military security." Last year, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said Russia was taking, quote, "adequate countermeasures" and would form 12 units and divisions in its western military district. Let's talk now to Oluseyi Adeyemo, public policy analyst, joining us virtually from Lagos. Thank you to you. Thank you for your time. Mr. Adeyemo, good morning.
Good morning, lad. Thank you so much for having me on your program.
Right. Let's begin with this situation that we have in Finland and Belarus. Russia is taking tactical nuclear weapons to the borders of Belarus. As a matter of fact, possibly proving analysts wrong. The tactical nuclear weapons do not appear to be for Ukraine. They appear to be for NATO. And this is happening just as Finland is joining NATO. Finland has a border with Russia. Is there a reason for us to be scared here?
Like we said severally on this program, for Russia, this is something they feel they need to do because, in their opinion, they need to have all their allies back on board. Now, Finland and the rest of them also are aware, and that's why they also are opting to join NATO, because it is clear that they also need to strengthen, have the kind of strength that can withstand whatever incursion that they might get from Russia. So the truth of the matter is an historical problem. This has been there all of this while. When all of them started to show interest that they wanted to join NATO was when Russia had said, this is not the way to go. This was not the agreement we had. We're not going to allow this. So yes, truth of the matter is the rest of the world should have their fingers crossed. If I want to, answer you directly, we should be worried because this is definitely not a very good development. But to a great extent, I expected it that everyone around would definitely have a piece of this action at the end of the day because truth of the matter is Russia is not satisfied with an incursion into Ukraine. They probably want more pie from other places as well.
There's also the fact that the NATO border is growing closer to Russia. If what Russia said was its reason for invading was to prevent NATO from, coming closer and to create this buffer between Russia and NATO using Ukraine. At least in the case of Finland, that doesn't appear to have worked because Finland has now joined NATO. So from an entirely different direction, NATO is much closer to Russia at this point. Does this increase the potential of, of conflict, especially because we are now talking about nuclear weapons, tactical or otherwise? Nuclear weapons are nuclear weapons.
Okay, let me start from the nuclear weapon angle. Now, the truth is, and it is good, that when you detonate or activate nuclear weapons, you only don't just activate it to affect your enemies. You also will, you will have a bite of what you have detonated. So as much as they can talk hard and say they would detonate or activate the nuclear weapon, I know that at the end of the day, everybody is cautious because at the end of the day, this is not meant to kill themselves. But yes, it is good for strength. It is good to show their enemies or neighbors that they have the strength and have the capacity to protect and take them on if there's a need. But so the truth of the matter is at this time, when you have a Russia, in the arrangement of a fight, we ought to be worried because anybody that has the nuclear power, whether it is North Korea or Russia, you can't afford to have them as enemies. So yes, there's a need to be worried. There's a need to be cautious in the negotiation and steps that are being taken. But NATO obviously feels that the way to go is to increase the sanctions and to sort of increase their presence. And that's where they're moving in more. And every other person is signing on. You can, like you said earlier, Finland have decided to also join NATO because they feel that the way to go about this is to probably just show Russia that they probably are standing alone and everybody around them is coming together to stand against them because of what they're doing.
Now, there are other things happening that might suggest that the potential for conflict continues to increase. One of that is, of course, the situation with China, Taiwan, and the United States. The Taiwanese president is on the way back home, having gone to Central America, and she's going to meet with the U.S. House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, tomorrow in California. That is in spite of the fact that China has warned variously about the consequences of allowing such a meeting to take place. You and I both know what happened when the last House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, met with this Taiwanese president in Taipei and what China did in the aftermath of that visit. And then the United States is opening even more bases in the Philippines facing Taiwan and the South China Sea. So do you see a situation where all of this presents more room for conflict?
Clearly, the truth is, as we also have said on this program severally, there are a lot of considerations that are on the table. Business. Taiwan is a very, very attractive bride, and everybody who does anything with them will not want to leave them. As far as China is concerned, they're just like a branch of China, and they will not leave them forever. They will do whatever they can to Ukraine that, the fact that they're still part of China. The Japanese had them for a while. They let them go. Now the US has seen that this bride is also something they also want to have a party to. So I tell people all the time, world politics would always come with all sorts of angles, all sorts of faces. And one of it is that Taiwan is a very good business partner, and nobody will want to let them go. So yes, it shows that the fight is expanding. It shows that the world needs to be more cautious at this time, and a lot of worries are more on the table. But again, it's about the gains and interest of people. And obviously, the US have a lot of interest in Taiwan, and China is not going to allow Taiwan to just go like that. So they're going to fight for it. And I just hope that the diplomacy, which all of us are banking on, will be properly deployed and utilized such that we will not have to go to war. They will have to talk it on the table, and everything will be resolved mutually, and whatever gains will go to the parties will go to them without unnecessarily going into war.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, for your time and for your perspective on the program this morning. Do have yourself a safe onward journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
And still to come on the program, Ukraine says 12 Ukrainian prisoners have been returned from a captivity. Plus, it also receives a first tranche of $2.7 billion from its IMF program. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Ukraine says 12 Ukrainian prisoners have been returned home from captivity. They include 10 military and 2 civilians. According to the coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war, 5 of them were seriously wounded. The soldiers were captured in various parts of the front lines. The headquarters said the Russian decision showed a blatant lack of interest in establishing further exchanges for particularly vulnerable categories of prisoners and civilian hostages. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has paid tribute to the courage of nearly 400 residents of a village in North Ukraine who were held in a school basement under Russian occupation for 27 days before they were set free a year ago. The Ukrainian leader traveled to Yahidny, where he gave an emotional speech recalling how villagers were kept captive in a space less than 200 square meters during the first month of Russia's February 2022 invasion. He said that 11 people died during the ordeal. Mr. Zelensky was joined on the visit to Yahidny, a village in the Chernihiv region, by German Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck and Council of Europe Secretary General Maria Pekinovich-Burich.
Knowing that we will do it and they have time to go away or we will kill them. Money for fast recovery, because now what we have, all our money we have, we push and give all our money, all our budget to the battlefield, to our army, to sailors, and for sailors, for everything, and of course helping for our teachers, medicine, and you understand it. And that's why we don't have money for innovation, really. And I think that it's not enough. If we don't have, that means we don't have enough. That's why we need support of our partners.
And Catherine Russell, Executive Director of the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, says at least 501 children have been killed in Ukraine since February of 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion. Ms. Russell warns the real figure was likely far higher than the numbers verified by the UN agency, adding that almost 1,000 Ukrainian children have been injured, leaving them with wounds and scars, both visible and invisible, that would last a lifetime. The Norwegian government has announced in a statement that Norway and Denmark will cooperate to donate 8,000 artillery rounds to Ukraine. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reacted to the announcement, saying in a tweet that he was grateful for the donation. Norway's statement added that the rounds will be standard NATO 15mm artillery ammunition and will supplement the Danish donation of 19 Caesar self-propelled howitzers. The Norwegian Defense Minister Jean Arild Gram said Ukraine has a significant need for artillery ammunition and Norway will contribute where it can. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz assures Moldova of Berlin's support on its path to accession to the European Union, as Moldovan and American officials allege Russia of trying to weaken the government in Chisinau. Speaking at a news conference in Bucharest, Romania, alongside its President Klaus Iohannis and Moldovan President Maia Sandu, Mr. Scholz said, quote, Moldova is part of our European family. In the summer, we were granted it candidate status, and I very much welcome how resolutely Moldova has tackled the necessary reforms that are indispensable for EU accession. Mr. Scholz expressed great concern about reports of alleged Russian attempts to destabilize Moldova and said Germany would do its utmost to support Moldova in arming itself against attempts of destabilization by Russia. And Ukrainian Finance Minister Sergei Marchenko says Ukraine has received the first tranche of the $2.7 billion from a new IMF program. The IMF, that's the International Monetary Fund, which regularly makes emergency loans to countries in crisis, approved a new 4-year extended arrangement under the extended fund facility of around $15.6 billion as part of $115 billion total support package for Ukraine. The IMF said in a statement that the program aims to anchor policies that sustain fiscal, external, price and financial stability and supports economic recovery while enhancing governance and strengthening institutions to promote long-term growth in the context of post-war reconstruction and Ukraine's path to EU accession. The program also helps Ukraine to carry out more ambitious structural reforms. All right, time for John McGuire to join us. Of course, once we had the IMF and so on, we knew that time was coming close. Morning, Ini.
Good morning.
So let's take a look at this. The production cut, we discussed that yesterday a little, because at that time the news was breaking.
Yes.
And we were looking at what the possibilities were. But now you have a bit more information about how this is actually impacting the market.
The surprise oil cut about 1.6 million barrels by the major oil producers, global oil producers. And the first thing it did was, you know, we also mentioned yesterday how the ruble had been weakening since Friday. In fact, Friday hit 11-month low.
No, that's right.
But, I mean, with this, and then we saw Brent is still up. I mean, both of them, that's WTI and Brent, are still going up this morning. We saw WTI yesterday, it was about 74. Now it hits 81, and Brent is now at 85. It was 84 yesterday. That means it's still going up. And it did a whole lot for the ruble yesterday. So we saw that the ruble soared. It regained some of its losses. The equities in Russia, especially, exactly, the stocks, the oil stocks, globally, in fact, globally, the oil stocks went up. So we saw all markets green yesterday, except the Nigerian market. All markets.
We'll come to that.
All stocks were up yesterday, so that led a lot of equities to, you know, gain, especially in Russia, you know, because they had been losing, the ruble had been losing because all those, especially end of the year, you know, they always have the tax that being paid and converted to the ruble, placing a whole lot of demand on the ruble and therefore giving it value. So we haven't seen that because a lot of companies have left. But this was, I mean, a good one for the ruble. It regained, even though it is still weak compared to, you know, Friday, compared to its original, but it's regained a bit. The stocks were up. And also other markets were up, even though that's beginning to wear out now. Reality.
Reality is setting in.
I don't understand how investors, I mean, there's a tightening of supply. So everybody thinks, oh, let me rush and get, you know, the oil
the one that I can get before it completely blocks.
And then it's not permanent. permanent for crying. It's not permanent. But anyway, so we saw for the different markets this morning, we saw that European market, they're still a bit high, even though not as high as yesterday. And of course, the driver is the oil stocks for Europe. Mining stock also contributed to that. But now investors are not just looking at the supply side, they're also looking at what's going on with the demand
side,
and
right.
also looking at the impact of an increase in global oil prices. We talked about it yesterday.
Yes, when you were talking about inflation, the possibilities of...
Exactly, because at the end of the day, you're making money from the oil, but where does the money go to if inflation comes? You have higher food prices, you have higher energy costs. You're making money here, but you're spending even more this other way. So investors are beginning to weigh and balance, you know, both the real scenarios now, not just the excitement of a higher oil prices.
Right.
Yeah, so we see it tapering in Asia. We saw by today now, the price have started, you know,
stabilizing.
Exactly, that is the right word. I mean, the excitement is wearing off. But you know, I think it hit more in the United States, because you know, United is very much against this.
Right.
Very much against this. They're asking for more supply so that the price will
come down, and Russia gets less money to be able to prosecute this.
Exactly.
At least that's the theory of how it's supposed to go.
That's how it's supposed to go, even though we see Russia still making some money out of it, you know. But so in Wall Street, we see that, I mean, by this morning, features and all of that, they've started tapering, they've started going down, because investors are now thinking, oh, wait a minute, while the stocks or money is coming from the oil, what impact is it having? Now, do we see the Federal Reserve meeting again and beginning with aggressive hike? You know, the last one was...
Yeah, in order to be able to hold the things down.
Exactly, because by the time inflation is going up, they do that to bring the price down. And don't forget that we still have that risk. It's what's that word? It's very flexible. It's not yet stable. Exactly, for the financial sector.
Right.
Because once the interest rates start going up, that risk comes back to the financial sector.
Right.
And it started with the United States, so you can understand why.
Yeah, the chickens. Some will say the chickens are coming home to roost. Now, Moldova. I mean, for me, this is a headbanger. I mean, one of the stories that, you know, just reported on a few seconds ago says, you know, there are allegations that Russia is trying to, you know, destabilize the government in Moldova, and everybody's crowding in on that. And then now you have Moldova buying cheap gas from Russia.
Yes.
I mean,
so the war has many faces. While some economies, I mean, we've seen some countries start alliances with countries they never thought they would.
Right.
And we never thought that we'll see Saudi Arabia buying oil from Russia, for instance, since Saudi Arabia is a major oil producer. But we see them doing that. We never thought we'll see oil being sold in yuan now, but it's happening.
Right.
So Moldova, it's obviously a small country that needs a lot of help. And the EU is trying to gather as much support as possible. But of course, Russia is also trying to do the same thing. So we see them selling gas that used to be about more than $1,000 for 1,000 cubic meters of gas. Right. It's now selling at about 600.
That's a steep discount.
Yeah, so I mean, we have our eyes on cheap oil for China and India, but something like this is also going on. So Moldova may not be talking, and it might look like they still need a lot of help, but they're obviously...
They're already benefiting.
Yeah, because they've already started saying that, oh, they don't want it, they're not buying as much Russia gas as they used to before now. But even the
fear of secondary sanctions, which you always emphasize.
But even the little you're buying is now cheaper. I mean, about $400 cheaper
than it would otherwise have been.
That it would otherwise have been.
it's all hideously complicated. Of course, that's why we have you to break all of this down. Thanks, Edie,
Thank you for having me.
For that. Edie will be back with her team. Business Morning follows this show, and then Business Incorporated later in the day. In the sport, Pep Cote has managed teams in several countries in a career spanning 22 years, and the Spanish coach says he has no qualms about his move to Russian side Torpedo Moscow, despite the country being isolated due to its invasion of Ukraine. The 45-year-old coach was appointed by the club last week, with it being at the bottom of the Russian Premier League. Russian teams have been suspended from European and FIFA competitions since Moscow launched what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine last February, which resulted in several players and coaches leaving the country last year. But for Clote, the war has had no bearing on his decision to join the club.
The club shared the vision that they have for the future. The club was very clear that the situation is very difficult at this moment, but shared with me the vision to grow a team and to put the basis of developing players and developing a team. You know. So basically, it was their idea of what they want for the future. Of course, that had more value in me than the situation that the team is on at the moment. Yeah.
That's our special program on the Russian invasion this morning. Thanks for joining us. My name is Ladi Akeridoluale. Do have a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.